Bruce, you've got something to add there?
Yes. One notification in relation to that, Chair. We received notification yesterday that we've had a long-standing forum representation from Newbrough School, primary school. Steve Hemmensley, who most, if not all, members will know. Steve's looking to stand back from his forum role, but the new chair at Newbrough, Barbara Mansfield, has offered to take over, has offered to join us instead. In light of the gaps around maintained primary specifically, I've suggest we accept that nomination, unless there are any objections. Unfortunately, Barbara has had to submit apologies in relation to today's meeting. It's come relatively late in the day, but she has submitted comments in relation to the delegation decision I can share subsequently.
Okay, that is fine.
Graham?
Yes, I just noticed in the thing, the Roman Catholic Diocese, you've got an N3 Fell, right? Shouldn't that be the Church of England Diocese? Because she is a head teacher of a Church of England school.
Yes, please.
That's quite correct. We'll pick that up in the minutes, Graham. Thank you.
Well done, Graham. Okay, moving on. Apologies for absence. Andrea, do we have? We've had one there from Bruce. Do we have any more?
We have apologies from Alan Hardy, Carrie Hodson, Councillor Wearmouth, and Barbara Mansfield. Okay.
Thank you. Can I just ask, can you hear occasionally a sort of whistle? Right, it's coming from me, and it's a set of reminders about this meeting, and I don't seem to be able to cancel it. I do apologise. I hope it stops as it's well after the start of the meeting. But if you hear that again, I am sorry. Thank you, Andrea. Moving on to item 3, any disclosures of interest, please? I'll take that silence as a no. And can we move on to item 4, which is the minutes and the matters arising? We've already had one comment from an eagle-eyed Graham. Thank you. Anything else on page 1? Page 2. 24-2, Graham Wilkins, this is something that you're particularly interested in. I think this is just an ongoing thing. Do you mind if we drop this from the minutes, and you may want to raise it periodically as you feel is necessary?
Chair, I don't know if the Councillor Rayner is present. Has he got any updates or anything like that on it?
Audrey's hands up, Colin. Audrey?
Audrey.
Morning, Chair. Morning, Graham. Just to say, I don't think Guy's on the call today. Typically, it would be David and I who pick this up with DFE, and we have done on a number of occasions, and there's no different update this time that we can provide for you. When I see Guy next, I will out it, Graham, but I think it's a good shout, Colin. You know, it's not to say that it will be completely ignored, but I'm not sure that we'll make any headway with this because it's not our money to ask for clawback. I understand the aspect that we're pressing on around, you know, this is public money, etc. But I will pick that up with Councillor Renner Thompson for you.
Okay. Graham, can I suggest that what we minute is that you will monitor this on behalf of the Schools Forum with Audrey and David, and report back as necessary?
Okay, then, that would do me great, because obviously I'm a stickler there. I don't like to see money going to waste. Or
absolutely.
Okay, they've gone into the children's, you know, school in an Bridge. Thank you.
Anything else on page 2? Okay, page 3. I'm sorry, Sue, that I missed your presentation on the schools the new schools organisation plan. I've printed it off yesterday. I'll have a look through it with interest. Into page 4, schools block. Well, we're going to get well into that in the agenda. Anything on page 5, SEN update? Gosh, that was an interesting meeting, and I do regret having missed it. I was poorly for a couple of months, so I do give my apologies again. And at the beginning of the meeting, I think I should have thanked Graham Wilkins for taking over the chair of that meeting at short notice. Graham, I did appreciate that. Thank you. Graham, you still got your hand up. Is that a carryover? And you're on mute. Okay. Right. Page 7. Gosh, you did have a lot going on last meeting, didn't you? Page 8, anything?
There's just a typo on line 30. It says dedicated rather than dedicated.
I like that. Okay, thank you. We can correct that. Page 9. And some important decisions taken. Okay, any other comments on the minutes, please?
For record, Chair.
Okay, we can regard those as acceptable. Moving on then to communication. Bruce, you've shared something from the F40 with us. Do you want to comment on that?
Sorry, simply for information, Chair.
Okay.
Members will be aware of the fact that we're members of a sort of the F40 group, in terms of we've been a member of for some years in terms of a lobbying group looking to get additional funding in education and some of the less funded areas of education. I thought, in terms of, we obviously periodically get correspondence shared with us in relation to that, and I thought it was worth sharing the correspondence that was both sent to the new Education Secretary and the new Minister for School Standards, and the response back, which I share obviously without comment. It's just about providing some wider context to obviously the school funding position for 22-23 and beyond that. There was obviously more detail supplied in the response from Nadeem Sahawi. So the papers have been shared on that basis. I'm happy to try to take any questions or any other points anybody would like to raise under this item, but it was largely provided for information.
Any questions or comments, anyone? Okay.
I think the one point I would make in terms of it, and maybe we're saying just on behalf of school members, I think the one thing I observe at the moment is obviously, certainly post-COVID, we're in danger. The school funding is getting more fragmented again, with different grants and different types of recovery grant, and I think that's something which provides a challenge to our schools. And I will say no on that. And I'd be interested whether that's something that's shared by, obviously, I know there's a few sort of resources leads on the call this morning, but that's certainly what it feels like from externally.
Okay, just on a positive comment, I mean, I was pleased, even impressed that F40 got such a comprehensive response. You know, in terms of communication, I think that's creditable. Okay, nothing more on that. Can we move on then to item 6, which really is the meat of the agenda? Well, 6 and 7 anyway. Oh, sorry, there is my notification again. I do apologise for that. Right, Bruce, can you take us forward on setting the dedicated schools grant?
Right. Yes, just bear with me. That we've got a request through from Deborah, who is unable to find her papers. Problems with the link. Just indulge me for 30 seconds.
Is there someone else who could take that?
Bruce, I'll do it. I'll send her a copy.
Thank you.
Was that Andrea? I couldn't see.
Yes, sorry,
That's great.
Chair.
Yeah, smashing.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Andrea.
Andrea.
Much appreciated. Okay. In terms of setting the dedicated schools grant, it's the regular report we always bring at this time of year. Main purpose of this report is to inform you of the overall level of funding we've received. We've been notified of in late December in relation to the dedicated, not desiccated, dedicated or any other form of schools grant for next year.
Forgive the frivolous nature of the comment, but from what you said about a couple of minutes ago about
it'd be fairly desiccated this year.
It is desiccated. That might be a good description. Yes. Go on anyway, Bruce.
Okay. Again, we will bring more information around specific budgets for the individual school elements back to the February meeting, which is only 4 weeks away now, the week just before half term. We also are required by the 21st of January, which is the end of this week, Friday, to send off the proposals for the the funding distribution through the APT, the Authority Pro Forma tool, to the ESFA, and hopefully we will have that ratified and confirmed ahead of the next meeting. I think the important thing to say at this point is there is no surprises intended in the report. When we met and consulted in November, the intention was to very much to move to national funding formula from 2022-23, and that's what's being built in the formula as it currently stands. And we'll sort of pick that up as we go through the report.
Sorry, I should have picked this up, Bruce. But can you just confirm that this has been through the cabinet?
Yes, it has been through the cabinet as well.
Okay, thank you.
So in terms of the background, again, I think when we met just over a year ago, we agreed very much a two-stage approach between closing the gap in 2 equal steps. That's something we've taken out the second part of this year, very much in line with plans already previously agreed. I think it's worth just at the bottom of page 21 there, just highlighting the overall schools block settlement of 208.5 million. It's 5.3 million pounds higher last year, but that equates to only about 2.64%. I think we'd highlighted previously the fact that the minimum per pupil funding levels have only gone up by 2% this year, and that's had a material effect on a number of schools. Generally speaking, the other values have just increased. The pupil-led formula values increased by around 3%, so it's a balance of the two, if you like. Summary table in terms of the figures there. As you say, that the main sort of area of growth, if you say, it is the high needs block. What was reflected in that letter from Nadeem Zahawi is SEN remains a key focus in terms of government policy. There are people on this call far better qualified to talk about it than me, and I think we're just still waiting for the outcome of the review of the SEN Code of Practice and see what the implications are sort of subsequently beyond that.
Are there any... Sorry, Bruce, can I just ask the officers, are there any more up-to-date rumours on when that might be made public?
I know Nicola's on the call, Audrey.
Yeah, Chair, just to say that no, we expected that in the autumn term, and it would be fair to say there's no white smoke. Lots of rumours, but no dedicated white smoke at the moment. So as soon as there is an update, we'll share that with Forum.
Okay, thank you.
Again, top of page 22 in the pack, just below the table, it is worth pointing out that of a concern, Northumberland has a falling school population. And that does have a direct impact on the overall funding. That overall loss of 157 pupils, may equate essentially to some in the region of, £800,000. And again, we're also seeing this shift in pupils from primary to secondary as pupils move through the system. Offsetting that to an extent was that, impact of COVID and increases of deprivation funding have sort of trickled through the the numbers this year as well.
You're going. Sorry, Bruce, to interrupt yet again, but you're going to mention later something about a falling rules fund and setting up some kind of mechanism to look at that, aren't you?
Yes. We picked that up under the specific proposals. It's something we discussed at the November meeting, Colin, and the intention is to create a falling rules fund and to seek the opinion of our formula funding committee in developing that, maybe a project for either the late spring or summer term.
Okay, thank you.
Before we move on to the response from the schools consultation, I see we have a hand up. Sadly, I can't see whose it is. Just bear with me.
It's Nicola Trowfall.
Hi, Nicola.
Just a question regarding the falling roles, really. Is that people not coming in at the bottom, or is that children being taken off roll and being home educated?
Good question.
Do you want me to answer that, Bruce?
Great, thanks, Nick.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, it is a lower birth rate that we're seeing across the county, and that's in steady decline. And we're seeing that in our neighbouring authorities as well, both in Newcastle and North Tyneside, who we work more closely with because of our close borders and movement of children. I think our numbers are falling at a slower rate than North Tyneside, but yeah, it's something we do tend to see a dip in the population on occasions. Hopefully it'll come back up again.
Thanks very much.
Okay.
Bruce?
I'm just conscious, David Street has his hand up.
Just another factor to add in, it's part statement, part question, because I'm not quite sure how it would be impacted on in the funding. But I think something to consider is we are also seeing an increase in our in demand for our special schools, or continuing increase. And obviously that increase in numbers is a decrease in numbers in our mainstream schools. So that's just an additional factor. If we've got a birth rate which is falling, and we've got a movement from mainstream into special, then at some point that is likely to have, those double factors are likely to have obviously an impact on school balances and the income that they receive. So it just is something to continue to consider, though. I'm not sure how that would affect the place funding.
The place funding element does work its way through, not through the schools block clearly, but through the high needs funding, where there was an element of place funding. But what that tends to represent is solely the ARPU equivalent. You obviously wouldn't get the benefits of the additional, on a per school basis, of deprivation, low prior attainment elements attached to that, although they are all deprivation factors in the high needs formula, and that's maybe something we can bring back to the next meeting.
Forgive me for throwing this in, David, but we are, if not an outlier in terms of the proportion of pupils at special schools, we are, I can see some shaking heads. I have that wrong, do I? Okay. What I was going on to say was, with these changes, falling roles, increasing numbers in SEND schools, are officers sort of looking at the overall picture in terms, I'm sure you are, in terms of strategy, but are there any plans to publish what you're looking at, or anything for discussion?
Chair, it would be fair to say, I'll start and other colleagues will come in. It would be fair to say this is probably occupying the greater majority of our conversations and time as a team. So okay. I'll ask other colleagues to come in a little while, but you're right around strategy. So our approach, you'll notice that we have, I'm going to say, some buildings and capital infrastructure approaches around what we need to be able to meet the needs of these children. You're right to say that, I think David said our numbers are continually increasing. I reported to informal cabinet last summer that on average we had a year-on-year between 7 and 10% increase. In fact, for this year it's looking much more like 19% increase, but we are not out of kilter with the national profile. In many cases around SEN we remain better performing than some areas nationally do. Okay. So whilst we're tracking alongside the national picture, what we're trying to do is really put in place strategies and plans which ultimately will not necessarily reduce that, but actually will change how we operate with schools and with parents, carers and children across the county. Okay, any questions for Audrey or David or Sue on that? When might we hear something more tangible? I say tangible, I mean, you're obviously working on it, and I'm sure you're working hard on it. But do you have any idea as to when you might be putting something forward publicly?
Probably something in the summer term, Colin. Really, it's a strategy that we're working on. Obviously, as Audrey said, there is a line in the council's medium-term financial plan. We've got £17 million. We've obviously got the delay of the free school. We've obviously got the capacity that we need to grow. We're changing the way that we're going to commission specialist school places, both in and outside of county. So I think all of that strategy process all needs to come together in one document that we're working on frantically in the background, while still trying to deal with the ever-changing picture, shall we say. Yeah. But yeah, the aim is that we will launch something so that we can start to plan for September 2023 well in advance of the demand for places.
Okay, that will be interesting to see when it comes, and I'm conscious that there is this rumour of a school's white paper as well, and I'm sure you're going to have to take that into account. I don't envy you your task. Thank you for that. Sorry, Bruce, can we carry on?
No, not at all. Just again, oh, sorry, it probably relates to the last point. Nicola has a hand up. Colin, Nicola Taylor.
Nicola, hi.
Hi, yes, just to reassure really from the perspective of Inclusive Education Services, the work we've got ongoing is tireless, and it fits very closely with the specialist capacity planning moving forward. So we will be reporting into scrutiny committee in April, and I'm more than happy to update Schools Forum with some of the NICE activity in the summer term.
Thank you, Nicola. I think there is so much potential for change that keeping Schools Forum abreast of that would be very useful, very helpful. Thank you. Bruce.
Okay. Yep. Again, Forum will remember we consulted on a consultation paper at the November meeting. We subsequently shared that with schools between the 17th of November and the 13th of December. 6 questions, essentially seeking schools' views in relation to the position taken by Schools Forum. Pleased to say that essentially across the board, schools concurred with schools the position of Schools Forum on the 5 questions given around the introduction of a mobility factor, the potential use of capping and scaling, the level of MFG, the transfer to the high needs block, and the proposal to establish a falling roles fund. Again, responses generally were in line and in accordance with the Schools Forum position. As was the case in previous years, the only real question whether there is any divergence is around the rate at which we set the minimum funding guarantee. You'll recall essentially that guarantees a baseline per pupil increase to all schools, and we have set that figure at the highest possible in the last couple of years. The proposal is that we continue to do so for 22-23, and that's what's been built into the modelling. But obviously there were some sort of differing opinions around that. Nevertheless, you know, we've said before, the Forum opinion is we're trying to support our schools, all of our schools, to the best extent we can possible, and that involves that use of the MFG at 2%.
Yeah, Thank you.
Okay. The individual elements of the sort of dedicated schools grant settlement, early years is different to the central services and high needs and schools block element, that we don't get any indicative figures during the summer, so we had nothing to share in November, but obviously they did come through in late December along with the rest of the figures. The figures were as in the table above. There is a 17p per hour increase in the 3 and 4 year old rate this year to £4.61. In terms of what subsequently happens in relation to that is we're directed to passport 95% of that on, and up to 5% can be retained for the administration of EY funding. And historically, Northumberland have passported slightly more than 95% on it. It's 95. I think the latest estimate we have is around 95.2%. Again, background around EY funding. The January census is key to EY funding, both in terms of the current one and the one next year and the historic one. And there is almost a rolling average is the simplest way of looking at it in terms of the 3 EY January censuses, which dictate the amount of EY funding available. In that paragraph there, it's probably worth highlighting that after doing calculations on the basis of the impact of that, while there's been a 17p increase in the national rate, the proposal as reflected in the figures below is that we're looking to uplift the 3 and 4 year old rate by 21p for Northumberland providers. Historically, when we've brought this report to Schools Forum, we've simply informed the schools of the overall settlement in January and set rates in February. However, in terms of after representations from providers, we're keen to give them as much notice as possible in relation to that, and obviously that impacts on both our PVI providers and the and the community powers nurseries within schools as well. So that's why we've combined the rates into this report as well, Chair.
Very good. I'm sure that's very useful.
We also.
Sorry, go on.
Sorry. We also consulted about, we moved in terms of the deprivation element, and we're distributing that via early years pupil premium. I think, again, the feeling is that's generally been taken to be a success, and targeting deprived and successfully targeting deprived children for additional support. And again, after the pupil premium and the EY, our deprivation element and the EY pupil premium, essentially that supplement goes up to £1.38 an hour is the proposal. Again, overall allocation of 17.6 million. And I think obviously what we talk about at the bottom of page 24 is this business about it, the weighted average in terms of the census. We then have highlighted the proposed hourly rates for 22-23 at the top of page 25. I'm going to pause because there's a couple of hands up. Apologies, I don't know. David, can we take you first?
Yeah, well, are you finished, Bruce? Because I was just going to do some summary comments really on the work done in this area.
Shall we well, in that case, shall we take Deborah's comments, and then if you want to sort of bring the picture together, David? Does that make sense? Sorry, Deborah?
Hi, yeah, it's great to see an increase. I wondered if there's been any comparative work done, Bruce, in terms of what other adjacent local authorities offer, because I know historically Northumberland has been lower, and whether or not the increase in the hourly rate will bring us more aligned with other local authorities. For example, the South East is obviously adjacent to North Tyneside and Newcastle.
I can jump in there if that's okay.
Yes,
one of the summary caveats I was going to add on is we have been over the past few years, even though the rates have gone up, we have been at the national minimum. And that continues to be the case. The only reason we're above the national minimum would be because of the additional 4p that Bruce has mentioned, that's been allocated into the rates for 3 and 4 year olds, based in some balance points made on the rolling average discussion. but there isn't there is a methodology for allocating the rates, and different local authorities do have different rates. I think we're very similar to Newcastle, but quite different to Sunderland. I'm not sure why that's the case. So there's some aspects of the way it's allocated that isn't clear. But certainly, if you were in the southeast of the country, the hourly rates being received by providers will be significantly higher.
Can you speculate, David, on how that might develop?
I mean, when I've asked the question, I'm always responded to that they're based on what's area cost adjustments.
Wonderful.
And there will no doubt there's a number of factors that go into that, some of which we personally might want to include in the calculation and some of which we possibly wouldn't want to. There's also been historically, there's also some weighting going on in and around nursery schools. So if there's a school that is a nursery school and that's their age range, there's been over time a significant amount of funding going into nursery schools, and the rates paid to them are a lot higher. And if there's a local authority that has historically a lot of nursery schools, that may be an element in the factor as well. We don't have any specific nursery schools and therefore possibly don't benefit from some of that funding stream.
Okay, any questions for David? I don't want to comment that that's bleak, but it's not as optimistic as I think we would hope. Okay. Anything more you want to say on that, David?
Yeah, just a summary comment really is that you can. My opinion is that the early years block calculations are the most tricky and complex of the blocks. And I just want to thank the officers that have been involved in this, because it is a regular and ongoing basis in order to keep up to date with the latest projections and predictions. And Abby and Bruce and E. Sinclair in particular do a fantastic job in keeping on top of it to make sure we do maximise the pass-through to our providers, who are also doing an excellent job with possibly the minimum funding available.
Okay, thank you. Any further comments or questions for David? Okay, can we formally...
Sorry, Chair.
Yeah, Deborah.
Can I just mention that, particularly in the southeast, I do feel for local providers, because recruitment at the moment is very challenging, as we all are aware, and not being able to access anything above the minimum restricts the capacity that providers have to attract stronger staff, which competition wise is stronger when you've got local authorities in adjacent to us and in a lot closer proximity. And I'm sure you're aware of that already, David, but I do think it's a factor to consider in terms of quality. We don't want to erode the quality that we're delivering. So yeah, I just wanted to point that out, Chair.
Thank you. Is there anything, David, that is going on strategically within Northumberland? Any considerations that might have an impact on this?
I mean, the workforce development continues to be probably the core purpose of the early years team alongside SEND. So Bruce mentioned before that there is some funds held centrally from the early years block in order to run the early years team. We are below the amount that is allowed in order to do that, and part of that team calculate and function around the finances as being described right now. There's another section of that team that function and support around SEND learners in early years, and then another proportion of that team work supporting the quality of provision, and then another section of the team will work in and around workforce development, in terms of both offering quite a comprehensive set of training packages, but also actually in terms of trying to attract the right staff into Northumberland and support them to look to early years as being a really valid and rewarding area of work to be in. Anecdotally, one of those areas of work, for example, has been about trying to encourage men into early years, and that program has been pretty successful, both in sharing the best practice and also in attracting some strengths to the workforce. But it remains challenging, exactly as Debbie has mentioned.
Okay, thank you. Bruce, do you want to say anything more about early years?
No, nothing from me, Chair.
Okay, can we formally note the points there on page 25, Andrea, and move on to the high needs block, Bruce?
Again, high needs block provided a gross figure of £44.5 million, and then there are subsequently deductions for places in a range of establishments in terms of specialist institutions and mainstream post-16 academy and special academy places. I don't intend to dwell too much on this at this point, but suffice to say that we will bring back more substantive proposals for the high needs budget, as in line with previous years, to the February meeting, Chair.
Thank you. Any points or questions there about paragraph 6, the high needs block? Okay, we acknowledge note 2, and can we agree recommendation 1? Any objections? I can't see any, so we approve recommendation 1. Thank you, Bruce.
Okay. Schools block, again, in terms of the elements within the schools block, the primary unit of funding for primary and secondary are the key elements that sort of multiply across our pupil numbers to form the pupil-led element of the funding. There's then a small addition to that in relation to growth and premises costs, which are paid on a historic basis. We have at this point agreed a maximum transfer, and I stress maximum transfer, of 1.042 million, and that was something that was reiterated by the school consultation, and again we're still looking in conjunction with the high needs budget at the final detail of that. Forum will remember that we did use capping and scaling last year. The proposal was around 4%, but by final settlement we were able to increase that to 4.65%, which enables schools to hold on to more of their formula gains. Again, we are looking at the use of capping and scaling this year. The intention would be that if used, the cap will be set higher, potentially at 6% or beyond that, again enabling school to retain more of their formula gains in relation to that. But again, that's what we're fine-tuning at this point. And we have, as outlined and discussed in November, introduced an element of mobility into the formula, setting it at 50% of the values, in line with the, again, discussions in November and the national funding formula position. We've talked about MFG at 2%. There's been no further disapplication requests made to the ESFA in relation to funding this year. You know, members may recall that we've historically made a disapplication request around additional sparsity funding, but again, as covered in December, delighted to report that that has been factored into the full funding formula this year, so that's no longer required. And again, we've touched on there, Colin, you raised the issue of the growth fund before, the penultimate paragraph on page 26, where the proposal is to set aside funding for £25,000 and work with the funding formula committee around the development of criteria around the growth fund, including those that are mandatory as set by the ESFA, in that the essentially growth funding opportunities is only available to schools that are either classed as good or outstanding by Ofsted, and can demonstrate that the additional school places that are being supported will be required in the medium term. Okay. Sorry, anything more you want to say, Bruce? No. You asked before about the Cabinet report, and the Cabinet report went on the 11th of January. And again, as outlined in that paragraph, you know, it formula figures will be set very much in line with the common theme of the last two meetings, but final delegated powers are delegated to Kath McAvoy-Carr in terms of the Executive Director of Adult Social Care and Children's. That's essentially just to enable us, if there is any fine-tuning of the formula following discussions with the SFA. The example last year was we pushed up the capping rate from 4% to 4.65%. So we require that delegated powers just to, finally sign off the final funding formula.
And that is as has been the case for years past.
Yeah.
Any questions for Bruce or the other officers?
And you'll see that the formulas proposed are in the column third from the right of that table on page 28, the table 1.
We are pretty close now to the national funding formula. Okay, can we formally acknowledge notes 3, 4, 5 and 6 in the minutes? And the next step will be in February, Bruce, when the actual allocations are issued to schools.
Yes, we'll bring the details of those specific. Yes, the allocations are due with schools by the end of February 28th. Again, just obviously our academy members are well aware of the position that the academies work on a academic year, so we'll run from September 2022 to August 23. The ESFA are directly responsible for issuing the academy funding figures, and I think they're due by the end of March. But what we will always do in the interest of sort of openness and transparency, include the indicative academy figures when we publish those figures at the end of February.
It's
so
very useful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Please, if you can do that. Okay, do you want to say something on dedelegation, paragraph 8, and your paper?
Yes, we have a separate paper, a separate short paper was circulated on dedelegation at the end of last week. That arose essentially because of the government publishing the outcomes of the school improvement consultation, which again we'd highlighted in November. That was still a current consultation at that stage, but almost with indecent haste, the response has been published. The key element arising of which the school improvement monitoring and brokering grant was being cut in half for 22-23 and removed thereafter. The government response included that essentially the funding could be taken through dedelegation for 22-23, but again, that's something we will seek specific support the specific recommendations as part of that report, Colin. We've covered that, and hopefully members have had a chance to read it. We'll pick that up in the next item.
Okay.
Notification in terms of their paragraph 9 Central School Services block. Members have been aware of the reduction in the historic factor, and that's been well flagged through Schools Forum. Rather disappointingly this year as well, we saw that there was a reduction in the current element, the formulaic element based on the current powers, such as in terms of the management school admissions process. That's something, again, we've highlighted with Abby and corporate finance colleagues to determine where of the potential pressures arising from that, and that's something we'll have to watch carefully over the over the next 12 months.
Okay, thank you. We acknowledge note 7 then. Mm-hmm. Anything more to say on this paper, Bruce?
No, that's it. We've got a summary attached in terms of the appendix, Annex 1 there, and that's it in terms of this paper. The formal dedelegation request to maintain schools will take as part of the next paper, paper 7, which was circulated separately.
Okay. Any final questions for Bruce or the officers? Okay, thank you, Bruce, for taking us through that. And can we move on now to item 7?
Okay, there is a separate
delegation.
Separate report taken, which was circulated on Friday in relation to dedelegation as a result of the late notification of the cut of funding and, if you like, the government signposting to the dedelegation route for funding for school improvement. After sort of significant discussions within the department, I think the line has been taken that we want to protect our schools from that pressure for 22-23, and we're essentially going to manage the loss of that grant funding internally. Essentially, that's what the paper's outlining in terms of background. It provides details of last year's dedelegated decision, and then you will see that the proposals for 22-23 are still in line with last year's position, both in regard to the services for which dedelegation is sought, and we haven't increased the rates by which dedelegation is sought for those services either. We haven't therefore taken up the opportunity to dedelegate in relation to school improvement funding for 22-23, and that's something we're just going to review on an ongoing basis. Again, paragraph 5, the potential estimated loss is £194,000 for 22-23. Again, pointing out that any dedelegation request, and that was something I've had specific discussions with the ESFA about, has to be taken on a specific per pupil basis. There is no grounds for variation or manoeuvre in relation to that, and that again sort of would impact differently in terms of the respective schools. So when you think of the makeup of schools in Northumberland, we have some very small schools, and we've had a slightly different model around schools, the services the schools, school improvement SLA offer, which doesn't necessarily reflect that. An indicative indication would be that the full recovery of that loss would be £12 per pupil. But as I say, we have taken the decision to meet that sort of internally. We're looking at the options around that, and we'll come back subsequently with proposals for future years. I don't know if any colleagues have anything they want to specifically add to that.
David, Audrey?
Happy to move on. Okay.
Well, perhaps just a fairly obvious question. When might we hear more from officers about that? Sometime well in the future, I imagine.
Well, any subsequent dedelegation decision will now be a decision for 2023-24. So we'll be looking at again. So any formal request will come through this year. Will come this time next year, if you like. Okay. But again, what will happen is, in terms of, we look at the respective budget mix for that. We have obviously a number of funding streams going into school improvement, one of which is through the services to schools SLAs, and that's one of the elements that will be explored, at least to assist with partially closing that gap. But the key difference is that schools are able to opt in according to their own will individually in relation to that, so that becomes very much a school choice. And I think, generally speaking, the school improvement services are very much valued across both maintained schools, and clearly are open to academy and special school members as well.
Okay.
Okay. And there's
any further questions? I think we probably welcome the fact that there's no impact for this year, and we look forward to hearing more about next year.
Worth a comment. There's a comment from Nicola there in the chat as well, which is supportive of the approach taken.
Good. Thank you.
David has his hand up, Chair.
David.
Yeah, just to say, it is a disappointment that the government have brought this particular step into place, and it is quite a significant grant which has supported school improvement across Northumberland for many years, and we've obviously been welcome and had the benefits of that. But pulling the rug with 3 months to go for a decision, and then it has been quite a significant issue. Having said that, as ever, we are currently rolling our sleeves up, looking at the costs and the expenditure, and also other income streams. We've done that to date, so that there's no ask on schools' budgets for next year, and we are aiming for that as well. But whether that will be possible or not, and maintain the strength of the service, is something we'll be working on. Probably November, December time, we'll be coming back with further details.
Yes, I think we acknowledge the difficulties for you there, David. Thank you.
Okay. Chair, we do need to take a vote from mainstream members who are affected by delegation decision in relation to the proposal, the recommendation and the rates outlined in paragraph 5.
Can I ask whether there is any disagreement to that? Is that fair?
Mm.
I can see one thumbs up. No hands up and no comments. Yep.
Face,
I think that is approved. Thank you.
I know Neil, Nicola, Mike, Ben, and Nicola Threlfall as well are all in attendance. I don't think Faye's with us, but I think she may be the only. Faye and Ben Ryder may be the only sort of maintained school members missing. The comments we received from Newbrough, the new representative, Barbara Mansfield, again, she was supportive of the position taken by the council, so was in favour as well.
Thank you. If Andrea can note that in the minutes too. Thank you. Okay. Can we move on then? The work programme, I think, is just to be noted. Anything you want to say on that, Bruce?
No, it's a question of really putting the late autumn term dates in diaries, as well as the sort of more recent ones which have been fixed for some time. So we have the subsequent autumn 2022 term dates of Wednesday 28th of September and Wednesday 16th of November planned.
Right, find it hard to get my head around that, but there you go. Okay, thank you. Well, we said at the beginning of the meeting that under any other business item 9, that Kath Dickinson was going to give us a presentation. Kath, are you there?
Sorry, I am, just as the radio's gone off.
Okay.
I've turned it off. Yes.
Kath, welcome. Thank you for doing this. Carry on.
There is a presentation. It's been produced by Kay Summers and Eve Sinclair from the early years team. So Kay's going to share it from her screen and I'm going to talk through it. Okay. I'd just like to say thank you to the early years team. They are appreciated from a practitioner's point of view in everything to do. And the two things which we're going to look at is closing the gap that's related to the wizard and the school's readiness passport, both of which are IT systems which provide data and analysis for early years staff, which help us close the gap for those disadvantaged children, because otherwise we'd have to be finding the data ourselves and the system does it for us.
Very good.
So I think if Kay's ready, she'll share the screen.
Yeah, just tell me when you want me to change slides and things for you, Kath, I can do that.
Very good. We can see that, Kay.
So what we've got on this first page is it's describing 2-year-old and 3-year-old provision in relation to the year-long project, which is about narrowing the gap for those children who have been identified as being disadvantaged. At the moment, for the 2-year-old funding, there is a 97% uptake, and that was autumn 2021, which is really good. And that allows those children who are in a setting to access quality early years education. And 94% of the providers have been judged good or better by Ofsted. And there's a large percentage of those settings using the Northumberland scheme related to standards for working with 2-year-olds. So everybody knows it's quality provision these children are accessing. Using the information that comes from the school readiness passport, you can see from there 82% of the checkers have been completed. And that shows that of those disadvantaged children, 55% of them are on track. The rest aren't there yet, and there's a 23% attainment gap. And what the project is looking at is helping providers use the funding they have to change their practice, to embed different things in that practice, be creative with their funding to see if they can work to close that attainment gap. For the 3-year-olds, you can see from the figures there is the percentage take-ups there. There's a 13% take-up of eligible DAF funding, and it's still an issue within Northumberland in relation to getting parents to take up that disability access funding money. And also from a practitioner point of view, there's some parents who take it up but then don't want to inform the settings because they feel as if they're not where they should be in relation to, are they going to be looked at in a different light by the settings because they're accessing money that means they've got a child with special educational needs, and some parents aren't ready to accept that yet, so that impacts on that uptake. And a lot of parents don't realise they can actually access it. So that's why that's not as high as it needs to be. But settings are working on trying to get as many parents as possible to take up that disability access funding. There's 91% judged settings, which are good. Sorry, I'll start again. There's 91% of settings being judged good or better by Ofsted in relation to 3-year-olds. The SLA take-up for settings in relation to the disadvantaged project is good. And if you look on the school readiness passport checkpoint, 72% of nursery checkers are completed. Again, 55% of those children are on track, but as yet to be confirmed the attainment gap because the figures aren't ready yet. Kay, is there anything else you want to add to that?
I suppose from us, just to kind of clarify that, obviously from a school readiness point of view, using that checker, the EYPP function within that system is one that's only been released in the last term, so that's why we're awaiting confirmation of the attainment gap for disadvantaged children at that particular checkpoint. Just to clarify in relation to what Kath was saying there, so it's 55% of overall cohorts that are on track currently at the 24-month and nursery ready checkpoints, and obviously the attainment gap reflects the difference between disadvantaged children and their more advantaged peers. Obviously what we would expect to see over time that the percent of children who are on track at those 2 checkpoints would increase as a result of the access to high quality provision, either at age 2 or at age 3. But this is not progressive. It's kind of a snapshot of data from the last term, and also within that we've got to factor in the potential impact that COVID closures would have had for those children last year that ordinarily would have accessed the golden opportunity, which is the 2-year offer, obviously within Northumberland.
Okay, can you move it on to the next slide? What we've got here, these figures haven't been released to settings yet, and this just emphasises the information that Bruce gave before in relation to the funding that's received for 21-22 and the funding that's going to be received for 22-23. You can see from there that there is an increase across the board, and from a manager's point of view, any increase is beneficial. So I'd like to say thank you to the local authority for that. It means that there is more money available for settings to be creative with, to work towards closing that gap for those disadvantaged children. And it might just be a few pence per child, but the few pence per child adds up, and it all goes towards making a difference for those children. Bruce, I don't know if you want to add anything to those figures, because you mentioned them before. Or David?
No, nothing from me, Kath. I mean, obviously, I think the key thing from the local authorities' point of view is we've passed on the, you know, around particularly the larger 3- and 4-year-old rates. We've passed on all of the sort of government uplift and a bit more. And you know, and I think it's important to just emphasise that, you know, what we found what we can from within the funding, and we're.
And just from a practitioner and nursery manager's point of view, thank you very much for that. I'm sure I can speak for everybody in early years. It is greatly accepted, and thank you very much.
The only other comment I'd make on that is around the 2-year-old funding, in that the entirety of the 2-year-old funding that comes into the early years block is passed straight to providers. So there's no use of that funding to support central teams or anything like that. The government give this year, it's going to be £5.57, and that's 100% of that's passported to providers in the rate.
And again, thank you very much. Is there any questions from anybody on that either maybe I could answer or Kay could answer?
Not a question, Kath, it's Colin Pearson, but just an obvious remark with the DAF at £800, you know, it's such a shame that it's not always claimed, isn't it? I'm sure you're doing everything you possibly can to improve that situation, but it looks like a biggie to me.
It is, and it's something I think all early years settings need to look at, increasing the uptake. It's an easy system to access. The difficulty is parents will get DLA, they then don't want to inform the settings always that they get DLA. And I think that's part of the sticking point, and it's about getting across to parents that they're not disadvantaged because they get DLA. It's an advantageous to them, because then that money can be used to provide more services for their child.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think just getting that across.
These might also be families, some families that would have children who qualify for pupil premium as well. And I know there's a similar difficulty there, isn't there, across the wider school population in trying to get people to acknowledge where they are financially, so the pupil premium can be claimed. Anyway, it's all rhetorical. It's a problem that we have to continue to manage. Yeah. Thanks, Kat.
Okay, can you put the next one on, please? The next slide is just to give a bit of information about the Northumberland Schools Readiness Passport and what it's used for. And it helps with the early identification of needs. There is effective information of sharing between professionals as part of the transitions. There's a consistency of expectations in relation to typical child development, and it monitors the impact of the effectiveness of selected interventions. But more importantly, since there was a change in the early years curriculum, it helps with the reduction in assessment and workload, which is what came about as part of the new curriculum for September 2021. So it's really good in relation to that. And if anybody wants more information on what the School Readiness Passport can provide for settings, there is a link at the bottom of Kay's presentation, or I'm sure they can contact either Kay or Eve Sinclair in relation to that one. It's used very well by settings in Northumberland, and it's the standard go-to. And if a child is moving from one setting to another, then the information is electronically moved via the passport, which makes things a lot easier as well, and it's a very easy system to understand. Kate, do you want to add in? Sorry?
Can I just pause there? I think it's Mike Dean Hall is asking are the slides going to be available, please. I think it would be very useful if they could be sent on to Schools Forum members. I, for one, would certainly like to follow through that link on the readiness passport. So just a request that maybe could you liaise with Bruce after the meeting to arrange that?
Yeah, that'll be fine. Kate, brilliant, thank you. I mentioned the Northumberland standards for working with 2-year-olds. This started pre-COVID as a pilot project, and I was part of that, and we had to finish it off slightly differently due to COVID. But what it's all about is setting agreed standards for working with 2-year-olds, and different settings can take up this opportunity, and it's about working together and providing a series of values and standards which underpin the expectations for high quality provision for 2-year-olds across Northumberland, regardless of their starting point. And it's available as a standalone guidance document and also available as part of online training. And it just helps nurseries and practitioners to know what they're working towards. And then that helps improve standards and it helps closing the gap. And again, more information can be found on that.
Kath, can I just pause you a moment? Deborah, you've had your hand up for a while. Sorry. Did you want to ask a question? Deborah
Chair, I'm okay to wait till the end if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Smashing. Yeah. Thank you. Sorry, Kath, carry on.
That's all right. Sorry. Okay, can you go on to the next one, please? This is just a little bit more information about the Narrowing the Gap Champions project, which is a year-long project, and it's just starting. And it's the champions will be supported to understand the complex relationship between disadvantaged children and attainment, and to know how important getting in early, providing a good service for those children is. It's linked to the Wizard, which gives information on funding, and it helps you to look at how you can maximise your funding claims and use this to support strategies for eligible children. There's a lot of work and discussion going on about how you might be able to amalgamate some of the funding you have got, or even work with another setting close by you to pool funding to provide services for all children. And then we're using the information from that to look at the percentages of children we don't have on track and seeing if we can reduce that number and get more children on track and ready for school. It's slightly different in our situation because we've got a lot of children with special educational needs, but we're looking at how many individual steps those children can improve. So again, we're working on narrowing that gap, and it's about working in partnership with parents and professionals to maximise the impact of the additional funding we can get and the funding that is already provided by Northumberland County Council to help us improve the services we offer for the children that we've got in our care. And it's a really worthwhile project, and it's proven to be very useful to practitioners. Okay, I think we've got one more. And this final one is just about the SLA agreement for early years. I'm going to take up percentages on there and identify priorities for this age group. Is maximising the impact of the 2-year-old offer, closing the gap, particularly in relation to communication and language skills, prioritising and supporting children's health, well-being both physical and emotional, providing opportunities to staff, where we're looking at Thrive training, oral health information, because that's now part of the early years curriculum, using interactions to embed interventions, using pretend play to support self-regulation and communication, using core texts to develop children's language and communication, using the outdoors, using music, and there's a really big focus on increasing the communication and language for children, which is a stepping stone to so many other things that they need for when they go to school. So that is basically a rough summary of what the local authority and the early years team is providing for early years settings, and we're just very grateful for that. And thank you to the early years team.
Thank you, Kath. That was very interesting, and I certainly look forward to getting a copy of your slides, and I will be following through on one or two of the things that you've said. Deborah Wiley.
Yes, hi, yeah. I just wanted to echo Chair's feedback, Kath. That's amazing and so lovely. And no disrespect to you, Bruce, but at the end of the day, this is what we're all about, and this is what really inspires us to be here. So it's been lovely to hear that feedback. Yes, Bruce, you've got a really important part to play, and I know that. But the on the ground stuff is what the heads are really excited by. So. Apologies for being excited, but yes, I love that. I really got a couple of questions though, first thing was, is there a cost to the Narrowing the Gap Champions project?
Not to individual settings, there isn't. We'll have to sign up for it, and you have to dedicate a year to doing the project. We have our local development officers there as mentors to help us if we have any questions in relation to it. The SLA have managed, the early years team have managed to secure some funding to allow it to access Thrive training if we'd like to. And again, there's a cost for that, but not to the local settings. Oh. So we're getting all this training free of charge. Thank you very much to the early years team.
It's very expensive because for a Thrive practitioner to be fully trained, it's £1,600 for me as a school. Yeah. It's a really expensive programme. So to be able to disseminate that to staff in the early years is great. The other thing I wasn't aware of, and I don't know from speaking as a head teacher of a primary school, the DAF funding, is that open to nurseries in primary schools as well? Yeah, I wasn't aware of that. And I appreciate that the Chair mentioned that it's quite a sum. We have had a number of children in our nurseries, and we do access staff funding, which is really helpful when we need to, especially when they're going through COSAs and everything else. But £800 for some of these children, they need very, very close supervision and virtually one-to-one support. £800 isn't even a month's salary for that. So anything that is available, we would definitely be mindful about, and if it's possible, I would really value those slides to take back to my partnership heads meeting, because I think they would find it really interesting to be able to disseminate it that way. Which brings me on to my final question, is how is this fantastic information and exciting strategies that we're seeing used evidently in some settings, how is it being communicated to the rest of the Northumberland practitioners?
Kay, do you want to jump in on that one?
Hi, I am here as an observer today, so I'm trying not to speak. So just to kind of go back to your earlier point about how our initiatives like Narrowing the Gap Champions projects accessible. So we as a team made a very conscious decision that anything that was part of our strategy around narrowing the gap for disadvantaged children actually informs part of the team's universal offer. So the Northumberland standards for working with 2-year-olds and the Narrowing the Gap project, along with the Northumberland School Readiness Passport, are all available universally to all settings, whether they subscribe to the SLA or not. So any childminder, private group provider, or school-based setting that is delivering either 2-year-old funded early entitlement or has children accessing entitlement at age 3 and 4 and in receipt of either EYPP or Disability Access Fund, had the opportunity to sign up to that, obviously with the expectation that they were able to commit to meeting the demands and the expectations of that project. In terms of sharing information more widely with practitioners, so obviously the school system for that is everything goes out via the e-courier on a weekly basis, and within that on a weekly basis there is also an early years update which includes any key and relevant information around opportunities such as this, but from a PVI point of view that is sent directly from the early years mailbox to each nominated manager or childminder's mailbox. So any information like that is sent on a Wednesday as part of our weekly updates.
Okay, thank you.
There's also Kay's possibly hiding a light under whatever a little bit, because there's also the excellent EMAG. So there's a termly EMAG which possibly some of the stuff from Kath today might be shared in the next EMAG. I don't know, as some feedback from this particular event, which is great. And there was another one I was going to say. But yeah, there's a range of communication strategies. It is difficult, I think, continues not just from an early years perspective, but lots of other perspectives, COVID perspective, etc., for schools to keep on up to speed with everything. I just sharing that must be tricky, Debbie. Oh, and I thought the other thing, there's quite a number of network meetings as well, which take place around the county, and obviously that's an opportunity to not just read about something but also interact with the team. And maybe Kay we could do some updating on when they take place and maybe share those dates and times and places to maximise the opportunity for folk to get involved.
Thank you.
I certainly share Debbie's enthusiasm. I look forward to hearing more about this. One question from me, Kath, and it's about the sharing of resources that you mentioned. It's probably early days yet, but have you made any progress on that, between, sharing resourcing between settings?
As far as I'm aware, no, not yet. We haven't personally. I don't know whether Kay or the rest of the team have any information from anybody else who might have done, but because a number of settings are quite close to each other, it's possible to amalgamate finances, say to provide better outdoor facilities at one setting, and then the other setting would then travel there to access it. Or it might be a case of one setting sending a member of staff on specific training and then doing like a staff swap. So that person who has done the training can then go and deliver it at the other setting. And that money would then be used to sort of like free staff in relation to that training. It's really up to the individual settings to work together and to work with their nominated early years lead to see what they can come up with. But hopefully the outcome of the project is, for those settings who have done it this year, they will be there to help settings who are going to come on board and do it next year. And it's a case of, this is what we've done to narrow the gap. This has worked, this hasn't worked. We're here to now support you. And that dissemination of that information will increase next year.
Okay. Might that opportunity extend, really pushing the boat here, extend beyond authority boundaries? I'm thinking, of North of Tyne organisation, or is it too early days to even think about that? David, I think you want to come in.
Yeah, someone for me to answer.
Yeah, no, it's not too early for that. In fact, one of the pillars of development from a North of Tyne perspective is school readiness.
Wonderful.
And there is actually a meeting tomorrow. There's been a roving programme of meets between the North of Tyne early years leads, and that's an ongoing part of the programme. But actually tomorrow, I'm not quite sure what Adrian's role is, but in terms of title, sorry, I know what his role is. And there's going to be some input tomorrow from the North of Tyne lead into the earliest programme, and we'll share a lot of the news that I suppose that Kath's been sharing today from a Northumberland perspective, and also try and get from the other local authorities their areas of best practice as well, and disseminate where needed. Newcastle do use the Wizard, so that's been a tool obviously that we've mentioned a couple of times that supported some of the best practice that Kath's been describing. So Newcastle work with us on that, and actually pay for some of that as well. So that's obviously helping support staffing in Northumberland and the development of that project. I personally think that both North Tyneside and Newcastle should be biting our hand off for the passport. They really should be, and we're possibly going to try and influence North of Tyne to maybe champion that as well. Excellent. So yeah, cross-border work, supporting and sharing resources, and therefore making Northumberland even stronger if possible.
Okay, that sounds very good and exciting. The whole thing sounds exciting. Okay, I'm conscious that we're approaching 11 o'clock, and we were hoping to end by 11. So can I ask, are there any final questions for Kath or Kay or David on this? No, I think that's a really good, optimistic point on which to draw the meeting to a close, actually. So thank you for everyone that's been involved. Are there any other really urgent items of business anybody wants to ask to raise? No? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you particularly to Bruce and to Kath and Kay for their presentation. And I'll draw the meeting to a close, and the next meeting is 16th of February.
Yeah, 4 weeks' time. Thanks, Colin. Thanks for sharing.
Smashing. Okay, thank you, everybody. Good morning.
Thanks. Bye-bye.